going to talk today about Bulletproof Freemasonry is what I'm calling it. It's a first-person account of a deployed military lodge and some of the lessons that I took away from that. So for those of you that have heard me speak before or have read my papers, this is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be giving any anecdotes or telling stories from my time in Kandahar. What I'd like to do here today instead is to highlight some of the lessons that I took away from my time there, as I believe they can be useful today and relatable to lodges back home in Canada. So I've only been in the craft for a few short years. So I want to preface this by saying that I don't pretend to be an expert on all of its excellencies, as you distinguished brethren here today no doubt are. What I do hope to do is to relay some of my personal education in the craft that I received through my unique experience, at least in modern times, of a military lodge. I would anticipate, however, that my personal understanding would not be out of line with what you have learned and established in your own Masonic careers. Here then is a short compilation of some of the lessons that I learned in the craft in Afghanistan in no particular order. The first one is keep your sense of humor. One of my favorite passages from the volume of the Sacred Law is found in the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. And if you allow me, I would like to just read that to you now. To everything there is a season and a time and a purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. This passage speaks to the importance of recognizing and maintaining a balance in life. This is necessary not only for our physical, but also for our mental health. You see, war is a dark and evil thing for anyone at any time. But especially so for this Canadian boy that grew up in the privileged bubble that is rural Ontario life. For 8 long months that felt like 8 long years, I lived that evil that is war. Now this affects everyone differently. Every time I left the base to go out on patrol, we would stop just before leaving the gate. We would load our weapons. We would prepare our grenades. We would turn on our electric countermeasures, and we would prepare to step off. I would look around at the men around me in that patrol and see how they were mentally prepared to go out. I saw a few big, grown men, seasoned soldiers, shaking like a leaf. Not just the first time they went out, but the 50th and the 100th time that they went out. Myself, I was always calm, cool, and collected. Not because I'm mentally stronger, not because I have nerves of steel, but it was because of my coping mechanism. You see, in my mind, I was already dead. When I stepped foot on the aircraft in Ottawa to leave for Kandahar, I knew that I was not coming home. It was only a matter of time until an improvised explosive device got me. Didn't matter if it was this time or the next time. You see, you can't hurt a dead man. You can't scare a dead man. I recently had a conversation with another officer in my unit about his coping mechanism before he went out regularly on dismounted foot patrols through Taliban-held territory. His method was the exact opposite of mine, but to the same effect. He told himself that he was Superman, that he could not be hurt. Nothing could touch him. And so he too freed his mind to focus on the task at hand. The result of this, practically, was that we were better mentally prepared to focus on the mission at hand and not be distracted by mortal fears. Now, this is helpful in the situation, but it is clearly delusional. And it's a part of that insanity of war. So where does the balance come in then? For many operational soldiers, there is no balance. And the resulting operational stress injuries, including post-traumatic stress disorders from critical traumatic incidents, are inevitable. I would be lying to you today if I told you that I came home with no degree of operational stress injury. In fact, I think any soldier that has served in a theater of war would be lying to you if he told you that. But I think that my degree of injury was lessened and my recovery was quicker because I was able to find a balance in lodge. The only laughter that I remember from those 8 months in Afghanistan was with my lodge brethren, whether in lodge or in fellowship. You see, lodge was a world away from everything else. It was a safe retreat. We chided and teased each other. We laughed at ourselves. We laughed at each other. And we regained some of our humanity. So to the Grand Lodge officers in the room today, I bring you this message. The best support that you can ever give to the Canadian Armed Forces is if you ensure that we never deploy anywhere in the world again without the privilege of being able to meet in a military lodge. So keep your sense of humor. Bulletproof Freemasonry is masonry that makes us laugh. Here in Canada, too, we can become unbalanced. We are too easily indulged in ourselves, in our work, and sometimes even the work of the evening. But when we take time to laugh together, we increase the bonds of fellowship. When we laugh at ourselves, we break down the bonds of narcissism, and we laugh with each other. We realize the chief point of Masonry, which is to be happy ourselves and to communicate that happiness to others. The next lesson that I took away was to be flexible. The worshipful master is asked at his installation to agree that it is not in the power of a man or a body of men to make innovations in the body of Masonry. I say the following carefully, so please hear me out before objecting. There is room for flexibility in Masonry without the threat of innovation. We have a tendency sometimes to become very rigid in our traditions, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not always a good thing either. Sometimes the answer to why do we do something this way is because we always have. I'm not talking here about our ritual, and I'm not talking here about our constitution. Of course, we did not improvise in Canada Lodge without dispensation from Grand Lodge where necessary. Let me give you some examples of how we improvised in Canada Lodge. None of us were there long enough to be elected to and pass through chairs. Solution: the worshipful master appointed master masons to the appropriate chairs to serve as required, and we had dispensation for this. We didn't have suits or tuxedos in Afghanistan. Solution, we wore combat uniforms. We could not disarm as Canadian soldiers. Solution, we had our weapons with us in lodge. We had to defend our lodge building from an attack. Solution, we tell the lodge with a loaded assault rifle instead of a sword. We needed to be in contact with our chain of command at all times. Solution, we had our cell phones turned on in lodge. We didn't have a hoodwink or a cable tow. Solution, we used a piece of cloth and a rope. We didn't have a convenient room adjoining the lodge. Solution, we put the candidate behind a curtain and put headphones on him. So sometimes we can get caught up in the process and forget about the results. Bulletproof Freemasonry is goal-oriented, all the while staying within due bounds and respecting the ancient landmarks. Masonry has a history of being flexible, but sometimes we forget this fact. For example, if I were to suggest here, and don't mistake me for suggesting this, that we go back and hold our next lodge meetings in a pub, I would fully expect to get several aghast looks and many objections. But in the early days of the craft, this is exactly where lodges met. Masonry was spread over the face of the whole globe by military lodges that would in fact only partially resemble the lodges that we know today. These early military lodges were issued by forming a warrant, were formed by issuing a warrant to the commanding officer of a regiment, and membership was initially restricted to the officers of those regiments. The lodge furniture and ornaments and jewels, etc., were only what could be contained in a small case, so that it would be transportable and movable as the regiment deployed from campaign to campaign. They certainly didn't have all the beautiful furnishings that we enjoy here in Canada today. And Masonry was spread and became global because men in those military lodges talked to good men about becoming Masons. We don't recruit, but it is okay to talk about being a Mason. Many of us wear Masonic jewelry, and I find it's often a conversation starter, a good conversation starter. The first candidate that we had in Canada Lodge started down his path to initiation through a conversation about my ring. And our second candidate had a similar conversation with another brother that started his path toward initiation. I think sometimes we don't talk about Masonry, or we're hesitant to talk about Masonry to outsiders because we aren't sure what to say or how much to say. My personal thoughts on this are that if we just talk about the parts of Masonry that really speak to us, the parts of it that we really appreciate on a personal level, chances are we're going to do just fine. But I digress. My message here is not new, it's not revolutionary, it's to stay flexible on a personal and on a lodge level, and always with a goal in mind. At the end of the day, if we are doing justice to the work and to the candidate, we cannot err. My next lesson was to live in the moment. I had the privilege in Canada Lodge of some very deep, personal, and real conversations with some incredible men. The bond of brotherhood affords us the luxury of skipping over the superficial, non-conversation conversations and getting right down to what truly matters to us as men, our hopes, our dreams, our fears and our troubles, our weaknesses, our shortcomings, but best of all, our insights and our musings. In short, we can bare our soul on the 5 points of fellowship to a brother with a trust that it will be appreciated, it will be safeguarded, and it will be reciprocated. Some of my most beautiful memories from my time in Afghanistan were moments like these. when we lived in the moment. I want to keep this talk today light, so I won't go on here to tell you the stories of the times when, following a genuine heart-to-heart conversation with a brother, I never saw him again. But I do want to highlight the fact that it happened, to convey a point. And the point is this, that I never once regretted taking the time to be there in the moment. In fact, quite the opposite. The sting of the loss was sometimes lessened because I could, without regrets, recall our deepest conversations and cherish them. Now, perhaps it was easier in the environment of a deployed lodge to be in the moment. Our minds were sharply trained to focus and remain singularly focused on the task at hand, on the war at hand. And perhaps when we took our reprieve in lodge, we were better able to maintain this singular focus. But this is a habit that I've tried to carry forward with me back home here in Canada. Because we live in a multitasking world, don't we? There are always multiple proverbial irons in the fire. We're continuously planning our next move or moves. Many times I've caught myself in conversation with someone and realized that I was only half listening to them. And with the other half of my mind, I was solving a pressing issue. I was planning the next day. And I believe we're all guilty of this from time to time. But Bulletproof Freemasonry teaches us stay in the moment. Time moves too quickly as it is. We go through so many motions in our daily lives, and we look back and we wonder where the time went. And that's because we were hardly there to remember it. When the senses are heightened by danger, when milliseconds count, time slows down and we are forced to focus and to be in the present. When we open the lodge, we go through what is essentially a group meditative process where we all singularly focus on the same thing. What that does is it brings us together into the moment. How much more meaningful would our personal encounters be, and our friendships, our connections, if we were able to carry this forward and employ it when we engage in fellowship outside of the lodge? We will only live this life once. So rather than hurling ourselves ever forward into tomorrow, we can be a more complete fulfillment of our present self by living in the moment. My next lesson was employ and instruct the brethren in Masonry. And the worshipful masters in the room just sat up a little bit straighter. Master Masons want to be put to work in the craft. And they want to be instructed in the mysteries and privileges of ancient Freemasonry. We were very lucky in Kandahar to have a master, a worshipful master who put us to work. If you were a Master Mason attending Canada Lodge, you, without fail, would be assigned degree work, assigned a chair for a meeting, assigned as a secretary, assigned as a mentor, and more. Sometimes we didn't know at the time that we wanted the work, but in retrospect, I wouldn't have had it any other way. Sometimes we have a natural propensity to want to sit back and let other people take charge, let other people work. We think that we can learn by watching other people work. And while we certainly can learn some things by watching someone else work, we learn the most by doing it ourselves. One can certainly learn a lot about cutting, squaring, and laying a stone by watching a master do it. But one will certainly not become an expert craftsman until he has practiced it for himself. One of the risks that we face when we let our Master Masons sit on the side is that they sort of peak in terms of their progression in Masonic knowledge, and also the value that they are getting from attending lodge. And they start to drift away. How many, I ask you, how many potential William Mercer Wilson recipients, how many worshipful masters, how many district deputy grand masters have we let drift away from our lodges because we didn't engage them, challenge them, and set them to work? See, you can't get no for an answer if you don't give it as an option. Don't ask for volunteers in a way that will allow for a binary positive-negative response. Those of us in leadership positions outside of the lodge, we delegate, we supervise, and we follow up. So why should we approach leadership in the lodge any differently? Let me be clear on what I'm advocating here, just to clarify. I'm not advocating that we force our members to take chairs and progress through the chairs, because really officers in a lodge should be chosen by a combination of self-identification, as well as by the senior leadership of the lodge identifying leadership potential and then mentoring that leadership. What I am advocating is that every member of a lodge possible be assigned work, be assigned to a committee, be assigned degree work, be assigned research. The experience of living Masonry in a war zone provided an extreme example of this exercise in Masonry, but those lessons can be applied back here at home in a more moderate sense. If every member of the lodge is not engaged, that lodge will not flourish. Conversely, if every member of the lodge is engaged, the result, there's a guaranteed result. An experience that cannot be paralleled, has no parallel in the profane world. This is the burden of leadership. We, the Master Masons, look to you, the masters of our lodges, for leadership. Employ and instruct us in Masonry. Look well to the east. Masonry and Masons thrive under pressure. Most of us don't like pressure, or at least we think we don't like pressure. But pressure can be a good thing sometimes. And Masons have shown that they excel in this environment. When we absolutely must do something, we find a way to make it happen. And Canada Lodge as a whole was a great example of this, and so were its individual members. This is perhaps a good point to follow on the last one. Masons can learn the junior warden's lecture and the final charge in a matter of days. Masons who don't really speak English can learn the work and participate in a degree in English. Masons can deliver on demand a piece of ritual that they have not delivered for years. Masons can conduct degree work in the middle of firefights. I know all of this because I have seen this. I've seen it happen. Masonry is a journey of self-discovery. In the second degree, we learn that there is a sacred symbol located in the center. And while there certainly is a sacred symbol situated in the center of our lodge room, this is referring to our center. Over the doors of the ancient mystery temples were often the words inscribed, "Know thyself." And so Masonry, like the ancient mysteries, is a journey of self-discovery to one's own center. On this journey of self-discovery, we find the divine spark at our center. We find that we have a strength within us that we were previously unaware of. The impossible becomes possible. The I can't becomes I must. And situations where others might shy away, the Mason, grounded within himself, perseveres, carries on, and triumphs. What greater moment of self-discovery than to accomplish something that you previously thought impossible? You have all no doubt seen this in your lodges before. The man who could not previously stand and speak without being overcome by the terror of it now stands and commands your attention. The man who could not remember a line is now an accomplished ritualist. Masonry makes good men better. Not because it imparts some outside influence or power on them, but because it encourages them to harness that power that he already possesses within himself. So sometimes a little pressure is a good thing, because it forces us out of our comfort zones. It prompts us to make that journey to our center. Masonry thrives when Masons thrive. And quite often they do that best under pressure. So in summary, I trust I've not introduced you to any new concepts today, as that was simply not my intent, but rather I hope that I have reinforced for you some of the beauties of Masonry that you are already, no doubt, an expert in. I hope that if I have left you with anything, it is an impression of how Masonry in a combat zone has given me a new appreciation for and an understanding of our gentle craft. I also hope that it can give you a new zeal and a new passion for Masonry at home in your lodges. Thank you.